Welcome to the Lift and Make Lighter podcast. I'm Tom Telford, sitting here with Ashley Connors and Jenny Howe. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good to have both of you. Let's start off by talking about dresses.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, Jenny, let's
It's been
do
quite
that.
a morning.
Oh, but it's real, right? Mental health is as real and as raw as it
Yeah.
gets in its purest form. So,
Yeah.
Jenny, tell us a little bit about your morning. Give us some background, and then, we'll have Ashley do the same.
Okay.
I'm chronically late. I'm never on time to anything. You can ask my staff that. And I know for some people that's like something that they see as a sign of respect. And I feel bad for those people in my life because it just doesn't happen. But today I was like, okay, I have like all this time in the morning. I'm going to get ready. And I had bought a new dress and was super excited to wear it because I hadn't worn it yet. That's a lead-in. So I put the dress on. It's so cute. It's like leopard print. And I'm like, you know what? Like, it's cute. It fits. It's a little too short for like a video of sitting. So I was like, I'm going to save this for another event and try to take it off. Not coming off. It is not coming off my body. I try to unzip the zipper breaks. It's like halfway stuck in the middle. I go through 3 pairs of scissors. They were not sharp enough to cut through the material of this brand new dress that I cut off. And so I contemplated going to the people working in my yard to help me pull off the dress, contemplated going to the next door neighbor.
neighbors.
And realized I'd only been there a year, probably wasn't a good look, and eventually got the dress cut off.
Yeah.
So I'm in jeans. That's the moral of the story. And it's a Monday, you know?
And it's a Monday. And you're our psychology expert.
Yeah. And this is why
It happens to the experts even. This makes
Yeah.
it so real and like so grounded. So tell us
true.
about your professional background. It's impressive.
Thank you. I think that I began this role of therapist like at birth. I was born into a family that with young parents that struggled, that had a lot that they were dealing with addiction, and moving from Utah to San Diego. I grew up in San Diego, and I was the oldest. And so I kind of grew up with this like responsibility I gave myself of being the mediator and therapist of the house. And wasn't sure I wanted to do it professionally, quite frankly. And then I just didn't know a way to live outside of that. My dad got sober when I was 8. And when he got sober, it just changed my life. And I recognized really quickly that despite like the mistakes that we make, the failures that we have, how ugly things get sometimes, like people change. And to have that experience as an 8-year-old formatively and in a part of just like the hugest part of my story, I just couldn't see myself doing anything else. So professionally, that led me to, I was going to do med school, I met with the counselors, decided that no, I needed to go back into like what I know, and went into psychology. I began my career working in the Division of Youth Corrections, did that for about 4 years, loved it. I was the same age as most of the kids. I worked in the prison system of youth corrections, so I worked in the secure care program, which means that they were serving like long-term sentences for felonies. And you can stay in the correctional system in Utah until 21. I was 21 when I began that job. So I was like peers with the people I was working with. I loved it. And then I began a family and decided that I probably shouldn't be like held by shank point on a regular basis, and wanted to like do something a little different. And I decided I had this really impactful experience with education, actually, where I was still in undergrad and working for youth corrections and kind of deciding what I wanted to do direction-wise in my career. And I had like 5 classes because I was trying to like throw them all in for as cheap as I could, you know? And it was my last semester. And I invited one of my clients at the time, who was a parolee, to come in and speak to my criminal justice class because I didn't want to write the final paper.
Yes, I love this.
I was like, I'm
You
out.
could do that
I'm
instead.
tapped out.
I
Yeah.
love it.
And he came in, and it was one of the most amazing experiences that I think I've ever had professionally, because he came in and people, you know, obviously had a reaction to that experience. We got permission from his parole officer, by the way. And one of the most important questions that shaped my entire career occurred in this session, which was somebody in the crowd was like, hey, if there was one thing that would have stopped you from not entering into the gang world, he was a renowned, I don't know if that's the right word, but renowned gang member, pretty prolific gang member at the time in the early 2000s. I'm old. And he said, if I'd had somebody structure something for me to do after school in elementary, I wouldn't have found something to do myself. I needed support in elementary school. He had dropped out by 6th grade.
Wow.
And I found that to be the case with a lot of the youth that I worked with in that program. And I decided right then that I wanted to go into school help. And I began my career, went to grad school, began my career working in elementary schools in Davis School District, and worked my way up into developing some programs, helping to add to the development of some programs for the administrative programming of safe schools in Davis School District, worked for Salt Lake School District, worked for an inpatient boarding school called Waypoint Academy over in Huntsville, actually. And then at that point is when I fell in love with working and specializing with OCD and anxiety disorders. It was a boarding school for boys, for young men who had really struggled, that needed like intensive support for OCD and anxiety, and became trained and learned a lot in the job in that experience, and had a client who was directing a documentary at the time. And the documentary was on teenage anxiety, and I was chosen to be the lead narrator and expert in that film, and was lucky enough. It's right now, it just was signed on for another, I think 3 years, it's part of the curriculum for California State school system in terms of helping people understand anxiety, which is pretty cool. Michael Phelps was in it, so I always say that. I didn't meet him, though. I wish I would have. But I didn't. And after that, I decided to open up my own business, really geared towards specializing in mental health care that was going to provide people a really specific and direct opportunity to understand both anxiety and OCD and receive the proper treatment for it. I believe deeply in specialized mental health care. I think that often we lump everything into this bucket of just mental health, and just like our medical health, right? There's a lot of different types of ways we can treat things. And so I've just really specialized my focus. It's been the last about 7 years that I've had this company, and brought Ashley on about a year ago. It couldn't have been luckier. So I feel like I've dabbled in just about everything in this field, but I've landed in a place where I think it just really matches my personality to be an OCD therapist, and have loved opening it up to other people who are amazing, like Ash.
Yeah. Ashley, give us your background, and then we're going to circle back to this, because this topic of anxiety, OCD, and the lens that you both see the whole industry through is so unique and valuable. So we'll circle back. Ashley, tell us about you.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm the luckiest that I get to work with Jenny. So it's just always fun to hear all of your stories. I just love it.
Well, you probably feel a little bit. I texted Ashley, I have to say, Ashley this morning in all capital letters. I just had to cut my dress off my body. And she was like, okay, that's a normal thing from her boss. So if that tells you anything.
That's why I love working with you. My background is different, but fun. I love just kind of seeing how we have met here at this point. But I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, and I remember the first time I actually went to therapy, I was maybe 9 or 10, and that was in 1989, so that's just aging me right there, but telling my age. But gosh, nobody in the world was going to therapy as a 10-year-old in 1989, I'll tell you that.
It's so cool that your parents did that.
It is really cool, and I tell them all the time that they were really amazing for seeing a need that was in our family at the time, and they picked up all of us. I have 4 sisters, and took us all into this amazing Dr. Ann Tyler, actually in Salt Lake. Anyway, that was kind of my first introduction in therapy. And I remember being checked out of school and being like, I wasn't ever going to tell where I was going. You know, that was like not a thing. I just had an appointment, and it was a weird mixture of feeling like super safe there, but also like never being able to tell anybody around me what I was doing or how helpful that was. And then at the same time was then going back to school and having these really incredible teachers about that time in my life. My mom got really sick, and I had these teachers that just like leaned in and loved me. And it was like this really beautiful thing. And I mean, I still keep in contact with my 6th grade teacher on just like Facebook or whatever. And I remember kind of at that moment being like, I just want to work with kids. I just want to be that person that felt so safe for me. And so I did that. I started being excited about education. Graduated. I don't know how fast to go here on my life.
Wore some blazers and graduated.
I did. I definitely wore some blazers. Still wear some blazers. I wore a blazer in my 3rd grade photo school picture day. I thought about that today because it's picture day for Walter today, my son who's in 5th grade, and I thought, oh yeah. So I wore my blazer today too. Yeah, wore a couple pantsuits to prom, and then basically graduated, went to BYU, did education, became a teacher, taught 2nd grade, taught 4th grade, and took some time off to have kids, and then would go back. So I did that off and on for many years, and then also worked with kids in different like math tutoring and different things. So I just kind of, my whole career has been around kids and children, and just really wanting to exist in that space. I love kids. I feel so comfortable around kids, and just love being able to kind of see what their little amazing brains are doing and just really get to know them. And then about a couple years ago, my 2 daughters both suffer from some chronic pain stuff. And in that diagnosing process and in trying to figure out how to get them help and how to kind of just really understand what was going on for them, I saw this other need in the mental health space of trying to find a therapist that understood like basically young girls and pain. And we were lucky. We happened upon a few really good ones in Utah, and we happened upon a few good ones that were really willing to like learn too and like listen. And but I kind of became really excited about that space of like, there's a lot of pressure on kids, and that manifests in a lot of different ways. And for my girls, that was like their bodies just kind of shut down. And to help them through that and navigate through that, I ended up going back to school and getting my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And I've known Jenny for years. And so she was really great at just kind of helping me like navigate the application process to school. I think you wrote my letters.
I did.
That was so nice of you. And then she said, hey,
I had a plan all along.
Like,
so
just hit me up when you're
Yes.
done with
game.
school.
This is a visionary. Jenny's so calculated.
Yeah, it's true. But then, I did school. Then I worked at Valley for a year doing my internship there, and I loved that, Valley in mental health in Salt Lake, and that was really eye-opening as far as like what resources are available, and also just what resources are not available to a lot of people. And then, so now here I am, and I love it. It's the best.
I have to admit, I'm a sucker for these two, for both of you. There's, my heart, it has 3 things. 1, women. I know who created me, but I know who built me. And it was largely women. My mom, amazing. So women, 2, mothers, and 3, just mental health professionals. I'm married to one. But the longer I do this, more I realize the hearts in mental health are huge. People who see a need and are willing to go back to school, to solve it, to dive in. And that says a lot about, who you are and the people that are in the field. So we got to double click on this because I'm interested to know. You mentioned that your daughters were in pain. So there was something going on in their lives that led you to circle back to the field. How did you connect physical pain to the mental aspect of that?
Yeah,
Because I think a lot of people just address like, oh, I need to
Yeah.
go to the doctor and that's the solve. So why
Yeah.
physical connected to the mental?
Yeah, that was actually a really interesting process for us and a really big learning process for sure. But it was a lot of doctor's appointments and a lot of unanswered questions. And we went to the emergency room a million times, and we had doctors who were very supportive and amazing, and we had doctors who were extremely dismissive and I don't even know, unkind maybe,
Yeah.
or I just think when you have a teenage girl in pain, it can look like
Drama.
yes, yeah, and so I think I called Jenny many times during that. I'm like, but yeah, so that was an interesting experience to kind of navigate. Like, how do you help your kids? How do you like advocate for your kids who are telling the truth, but doctors can't find an answer? And so that really was like a big learning curve for me. But we ended up going out to Stanford and meeting with some doctors there, and that was a really good turning point for my oldest daughter. And they basically said, we want you to get a really good physical therapist, we want you to get a really good cognitive behavioral therapist, and we will like guide you through this process. And I was like, okay, a therapist? Like, I get the physical therapist. And that's kind of when I connected all the pieces of like, and I knew I could see see that both my kids' mental health was struggling when they were in pain. That seemed really obvious.
Yeah.
But the part of it, like being the healing part of it, I was like, okay, let's go. And it was really, a lot of learning.
Well, and something that Ashley brought up to me that we talked about, at the time, and then as she came on board, was this idea of how the connection between like the mind and the body is just there. And it's even funny, like, as I say that out loud, that I have to say that because the brain is a part of the body, like it's all connected.
Yeah.
But for so long, the top down versus bottom up processing of the two fields have been incredibly different. What I mean by that is often the medical field will look to address the symptoms and the mental health field will look to address the root of the issue. And they don't often cross paths. And now we do a much better job, I think, of being a little more holistic in that approach. But just the fact that, this family had to go to Stanford, which has a really great chronic pain program, by the way, they do a lot of great research there, to get that answer and that support and that treatment plan shows just still where we're at, right? Like we didn't have that accessibility here. The pieces you could put together, but to get the holistic approach to it, required a lot of effort on your family's behalf. And when we talked about this, we actually talked about how her daughter, I think your oldest daughter, went through physical exposure therapy, essentially. That's a lot of the treatment for the disorder she has, where they would, her brain was sending signals to her body. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Where basically it was interpreting pain where it wasn't. And so for her brain to understand that she wasn't in pain, she had to put herself into the fire of that pain and go to physical therapy and feel it, which is just, heroic to think of, your teenage, it makes me teary, teenage daughter having to do something like that. But the tenets of exposure therapy are very real for a lot of different areas of our life. And that's, exposure therapy is the core system of how we treat OCD. It's the gold standard. But when we touched base on that, I was like, oh, you're going to love exposure therapy. You've already done it. Your daughter's done it, and they saw the value in it and how it just really, saved her life in a lot of ways.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember sitting actually I think we were in a Starbucks.
Yeah.
And we were talking about the overlap of like that you see with chronic pain and anxiety and OCD and we started talking about like neuroplasticity and how cool it is. And, we're geeking out over just the fact that the brain can change. And I've seen it physically in my kids. I've seen it emotionally in clients. I've seen it emotionally in my own kids. But like the idea, and even in myself, but the idea that we have, you know, the brains have neuroplasticity, and we have these amazing tools to help people, like, just face the stuff, go through it,
Yeah.
feel that pain, and have it get better is just a really cool thing. So, yeah, I love
we
it.
geek out on that in our
We
free
do.
time. And that tells
Super
you
valid.
how, like, nerdy we are.
If you only knew how much Kevin and I talk about neuroplasticity. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about it in the context of someone in pain,
Yeah.
right? A child who's in pain is struggling. And it's interesting that you go through the process to help a child get better. What's unique about that is that at times we tend to think, well, someone's broken, and so you go through the whole process, and that's much more challenging in society to accept that because you approached it through pain or that something was wrong, right? Whereas I get contacted weekly from friends of mine, guys or women, and really what they want is their child to be coached in sports. They want better performance out of their children in a sporting activity or dance or whatever. They're struggling with anxiety when they go to competition. And it all leads them back to this same topic of neuroplasticity and what's going on with the mind, right? The mind and body connection is so key that we oftentimes don't want to address when there's a problem, but we do want to address when it's performance or getting really good at something. And so, you know, there's this whole blind spot in society about brokenness leading you to mind care versus performance and competition, and all of a sudden that's acceptable. So
On that note, there's a really interesting, like, kind of mashup of performance anxiety and exposure therapy, where people, especially like in, you know, more affluent areas, really focus on performance and outcome measures with their kids.
Sure.
And so that creates just these little bundles of nerves in their bodies. I had a client who was playing for his 8th grade football team in Davis County area. And he got tackled, hit pretty hard. And I think he was out for most of the season prior. So coming back, he was quarterback. It was a big part of his family life. He could not take the snap. He was just terrified of being hit hard. So he sat in my office and we put a mattress behind him, and we had people push him down and push him down and push him down and push him down, alongside creating a script of, what's the worst case scenario here? I get pushed down, I never play football again, or it hurts, or I have to go to the hospital. Whatever his fear was, I can't remember exactly, it was probably in that pocket.
Yeah.
We would repeat that. He would listen to it on the way to practices. He would expose himself to his fear and practice falling backwards over and over and over again. And he had an incredibly successful season as a result of that. So what we generally think leads to better outcome and performance in our kids, like really honing in, getting them to kind of like tighten up and you know,
suck it up.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually the opposite. It's teaching them how to fail. And in performance sports and performance in general, that's a huge blind spot that we miss. But that was just popped in my head.
There's so much there.
Yeah.
Oh my word. I think it's fascinating. The concept of exposure therapy is something that we need to bring back in the dialogue, you know, today as we kind of go through this. But circle back to, you discussed early on in your description of your experience, education. Both of you have education in the context of your careers and profession, and obviously you're working in it a lot now. Talk about education as a key intersection of mental health. Why is it? Why does it show up there? What is it about the education process or system that a lot of the mental health issues surface there?
It was the only place that's truly accessible for everybody, public education. So without question, it's the place where we can serve everybody and focus on their mental health. It's very rare that people have the accessibility to engage in private mental health therapy and insurance. Like that's an expense. It's a luxury for a lot of people. And we deeply recognize that. But when we go into the school system, the educational system, our counselors, our social workers, our psychologists, they are seeing everybody. And it's a true blank slate for being able to access support and care for kids. And it's so preventative. There is so much we can do in the elementary landscape of mental health preparedness in elementary school that can set kids up for understanding the tenets of exposure therapy, for addressing their anxiety, for having emotional labels. Those things are going to create happier, healthier adults if we focus on that more. But man, it's just this huge opening for a way to kind of tackle society's mental health as a whole, in my opinion.
Did you see that firsthand, Ashley, in your teaching? And what were you seeing? Because I'm intrigued about education. I know my experience, which, we can talk a little bit about, but education and being in a classroom, I still associate it with stressors.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have called that as a kid. I just would say it sucked. I hated school.
Yeah.
Right.
But in reality, it was a very stressful environment for me.
Yeah.
What is it about school that brings that out in children?
Oh man, all of it. I actually think that's like probably one of the best parts of my job right now is that reminder of how hard it is for all of our kids going to school. Like it really is kind of a pressure cooker socially, emotionally, like even just like mentally and learning and all that. So it's like you have this little, classroom environment where you put, 30 some odd kids together and just like you're trying to manage that little classroom family, and there's so many different needs and so many different personalities, and it's like the best part of it. That's like what I loved the most about education was like how to do that. And also like you see these little individuals who have their own individual lives that they're bringing into that space, and there's just so much there. Like they sit there. I remember thinking like I spend so much time with people's kids, more time than I do with my own kids. Like I'm spending 6 to 7 hours a day with these kids, and so I see them all day long and know them, and watch how they handle friend situations. Watch how they handle when a math problem feels too hard. Watch how they handle all these different things, and it just felt like this window into their lives, and it's a lot. Like they do a lot. I just have a lot of, compassion for how hard it is to go to school every day for kids.
I agree with you. I think it is a pressure cooker, especially again in the more like affluent areas, right? But I was a kid who grew up really poor. I went to 5 different elementary schools. School was my only safe space. Yeah. So you see the flip side of that coin as well, where like I just relied on the consistency of school and the teachers to be involved with my life, and for them to, it'll make me emotional, for them to help me with friends and recognize my strengths. And that part of my life was crucial to my mental health. So I think in both ways, right, we see individuals coming to school and needing to access something there, and teachers playing a pivotal role in the way that that child is going to grow into adulthood. Because you're exactly right. The ways that they see all of these openings into the world of these children gives them, total access to be able to influence in a negative or a positive way.
Yeah. I'm just hearing this and it reconfirms to me the incredible job of an educator. What they're asked to do, what they're asked to achieve in the children's performance in terms of testing and growth. And yet in reality, they're all doing therapy every day. They're doing group therapy every day.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Say more about that, Ashley, from your perspective, just, the role of teacher and how it crosses over and what because they're trying to teach topical things, but in reality, they're engaging in emotion all day, every day.
Yeah,
to get them to perform.
Yeah. Well, I remember, I'm trying to think of when it was, but a couple years ago, it was probably the same year I was, I think it was 2020, actually. I think it was COVID year. So I was part-time teaching second grade. I was in my master's program at the time. I was a mom, obviously.
Four kids living in your house.
Yeah, four
Not just
kids,
a mom.
all doing COVID school
Yeah.
too. This was a not very fun year. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
This was during COVID.
Yeah,
Yeah.
during COVID. So yeah, I was teaching. I was in school. Maybe it was next year. Anyway, there was I was also at Valley, so maybe it was last year. Whatever. I can't keep track. I think I've
was a
blurred.
blur.
I think I've blurred a lot of it.
It's traumatic.
Very. But I remember having this weird intersection of there. Politically, it had kind of been brought up social emotional learning was getting just kind of brought up a lot. People were confused about what it was. People were worried about it being taught in the schools. And I remember thinking, this is the most helpful thing we can be doing right now. Aside from teaching these kids is giving them some tools, some awareness, just the social emotional skills that they need to exist in the school. And that was just a really interesting moment of why would we not want our kids to have that in schools? And there still is a lot of push to keep social emotional learning out of schools. And I think it's misinformation probably that people don't know what it is.
It's a focus on performance. It's a focus on outcome, right? If we're taking time away from getting our kids to be optimized, then, we're going to lose something there. And that should be the role of the parents. And they aren't recognizing the opening there for it to be all things rather than one or the other.
Right.
And also that we're not little people that need to be optimized.
Right. I'm still learning that.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
That's fascinating to me. I won't stir that pot maybe the wrong way, but yeah. So the role of teacher is, I think, maybe oversimplified, or they're asked to be oversimplified in terms of what they're actually doing. Just, teach the knowledge and, leave your emotions at the door type thing, which is fascinating. What else would you say about the intersection of mental health in school? Maybe the challenges that surface with educators or teachers and what they're allowed to bring up?
Yeah.
I know from my own experience in our own family, with one of our children, the way his teacher brought up his struggle was masterful. And how she did it, how she navigated that, and frankly, because of it, what occurred in his own diagnosis and our ability to get help at the time that we did, he literally is me. He's the mini me. But the difference in his progressive outcome of learning and education, he has confidence, whereas it crushed me, literally crushed me until I was out of high school, not believing that I could literally learn. And yet he's gone through the same process with an entirely different outcome, So talk about that.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people think, well, what do you mean? The teachers just, can say to parents, well, I think this or that, or it's not true. There's actually a process that teachers are told what they can and can't talk about.
Yeah. I mean, you could probably attest to this more, but I was the counselor at the school, so I had a little bit more flexibility in what I could talk about. But even then, within the scope of the school district, being a school counselor, there still is some limitations, right? I couldn't provide diagnoses. I couldn't provide treatment plans, those types of things. I would work with outside therapists to do that. But I found that teachers know that mental health stuff is occurring in their classroom. They're not, despite whatever type of resistance they're receiving from parents, they know that they have to deal with that regardless. So there's a case management process generally for schools where they will bring up cases to treatment teams. So an administrator, a counselor, a psychologist, a special ed teacher, and they can kind of staff the case and the kid and come up with a way to really have some data-driven decisions in regards to how they can help this child in a school setting. And then say something like, if this were my child, I may want to look at A, B, C, or D as an option. And it's kind of the rule of thumb for how we say things, which is honestly no different than what doctors do to us as well. If this were my child, I would do this.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this clause there. But teachers play a pivotal role in seeing it. Like Ashley said, she's the one seeing how this child is responding to failure, how this child is responding to frustration, how this child is responding to friendship issues. And, there's a responsibility attached to that being a teacher, because we recognize that learning can't take place unless the child is feeling well and safe. And when they don't feel safe, when they don't feel well in the classroom, whether or not they can divide is thrown off the table. So I think teachers know this, and they do a really wonderful job of addressing this. But I think there are limitations at times and rules and hoops that teachers feel like they have to jump through in order to address these things with people. And then they're kind of like dismissed by people at times. Some people are really grateful, like your family, for the support of the teacher. And then I'm certain that you also had experiences where people were very unwelcoming of what you were seeing in their children. And so we put teachers in this position of saying hard things to families all the time. And I mean, I can't think of a better definition of a therapist as somebody who says hard things to people. And that's how I knew she'd be a fantastic therapist. But they don't get the backup and support. And so it's a really tough spot to be in as a teacher. And I think a lot of teachers have learned just to kind of stay back and say nothing, which is of detriment to the kids, in my opinion. But the intersection of mental health in education, I mean, it's just there. We don't create it. We're not creating it by adding SEL learning to classes. We're not creating it by addressing anxieties and preferences in the classroom. It's just already there. And so if we don't label that, then kids are learning to hide it. And I don't know your experience personally, Tom, but I would imagine that was part of your experience, and that's what leads to a lot of shame and frustration over time.
Yeah.
So we need to provide environments, and we do, and teachers do a wonderful job of this. I will never, ever speak negatively about especially elementary educators. I think they are God's gift to our children. But we need to really understand that they have an opening to seeing things in our kids that we may not see, quite frankly.
Even hearing you say that, I got to bring my story into this so people know. I was raised in a safe household.
Yeah.
Both parents, father, mother. I was the youngest of 5 kids. We were as stable as it gets. And yet my experience in school, for sure, if I were to go back to my kindergarten, early years, for sure, ADHD diagnosis, struggled big time. I was called out of class consistently to go to the tutor, which actually became a saving grace, right? I had, his name was Mr. C. I still remember, Morgan Elementary. And I spent a lot of time learning to read. That was extremely helpful. But the shame of it, getting called out of class, and the process that I went through, I should say, it did become shameful.
Yeah.
So, for people hearing this, just so you know, you can get all the way through high school. And what you're going to get is a masterful hider.
Yes, exactly.
I was unbelievably good at hiding. I was charismatic. I was flirty. I was the kid who people just thought, oh, he's just a good kid, an athlete or whatever. I was an absolute chameleon to just surviving the day. And so I could say the right things. I could behave in the right way, where my parents and teachers just thought it was okay. And so, I mean, it sounds strange, but in reality, if you don't have the confidence and you're feeling shame, what you're going to do is go underground.
Yeah,
and I did. Even now, when people hear that I had such a hard time in school, my mom knew, but she didn't necessarily know, how to address it. And I just became so good at hiding. So what do you do? What do you do at the Tommy Telford, right? Who is going through the process. I mean, luckily, for our son's teacher, I mean, when the way that she addressed it with us as parents, I was so emotional that day leaving, because the way that she bridged the gap with us was incredible. And she didn't outright say, your son has this. What she said was, he's struggling to do these kinds of things in class. And as soon as she, went down that road, I just knew like, okay, like this is my childhood all over again. So say more, knowing that you use me as the, example, but what's in that story where, whether it's the educator or the, or the process, or whether it's the parents, what do you do when I don't know, maybe your intuition as a parent is saying something's off here, but Tommy is saying everything's fine. He's got friends. He's playing sports. How do you intervene further? What do you do? How's that for pressure?
Yeah, I think that's the most common question I get asked whenever I do speaking events by the crowd is parents asking, like, how do I actually step in and provide support? Like, what if my kid doesn't want it? What if people aren't seeing it? How do I intervene? And what I know to be true, because we can't control outcomes here, is that when we share our stories with our children and we provide spaces for shared shame stories, when we provide spaces for mistakes, not performance, kids will eventually come around and feel safe enough to be able to allow for intervention. And to me, the definition of safety is shared spaces for mistakes. It's me coming in this morning and telling you guys, hey, I'm late because I had to cut a dress off of my body, right? Rather than overcompensating and trying to be charismatic and come in and have some, like, sorry, I touched the mic, have some, superfluous excuse. It's being honest and being real with our kids. And I think that society as a whole has kind of drifted into this lane where we do that a little bit more with a little more acceptance in our era. I don't think parents had that skill set yet to be able to do that. So it's different. But we intervene when we allow for authenticity to be present. And that means that when we go into a classroom and a teacher is doing her best to have a hard conversation with us about our kid, rather than feeling defensive, we open ourselves up to the idea that, man, this is my kid. This is the thing that I experienced that I feel shame for, and I'm not going to run from it this time. I'm gonna stay with this and do something different, right? And that's what created safety for your son, I imagine, in that circumstance. So intervention, I guess existentially, is safety through authenticity. Logically or logistically, people need to know that you can call any school at any time as a parent, and if you can request testing for your child. People don't advertise that. People don't say anything about that because they don't want to do it. But if you call the administrator, or I'd get it in writing, I'd email the administrator and say, I'm concerned about my kid at school. I'd like to request testing. The psychologist and the resource team have to come in and provide testing. It's federal law. So we can access that. And there's a process of a child receiving extra help and services, be it with the psychologist or the counselor, or even, the resource department or the special education department. But it can begin with you. We as parents have that right to be able to do that. And I've given that advice to parents over and over and over again. Some school districts I worked for Davis School District for a number of years in a department that not only had testing, but we could do pretty much, we call them risk evaluations because you can't do psych evaluations inside the school setting. But I was referred kids sometimes by parents, mostly by administrators, that were really, really, really struggling and needed a full body assessment. And I would spend 4 or 5 hours with these families and these kids and come up with a treatment plan, sometimes assigning them assistants in the district to be able to be successful at school. And those things exist. We just don't know about them unless we ask. So the best thing we can do is be an advocate for our child in that way. And just recognize that the more honest we are with everybody in our life about that, the easier it's going to be for our kid to accept it in themselves.
Yeah. So much there, that you've shared. And Ashley mentioned this earlier. I want to kind of double click on this idea of societally, what are some of the factors that are driving some of the symptoms that children are feeling in school, what some of those, root causes are. But one of the words that you've now mentioned a few times is shame. And that is so real. You know, for some people who may hear that word shame, I think it's very popular today to hear shame, or, you know, I mean, it's often discussed. But when I go back to my childhood, there are two emotions that I felt on a very regular basis. And the first is embarrassment, right? Being called out of class, the slow kid, because of not, I mean, I was a distraction, right? I couldn't learn. So what do you do then? You become the class clown, or, you know, I mean, I remember from a very young age, like I was a masterful flirter, and it was a distraction
I was 2 years
in
younger
class.
than him in high school. I can vouch for that. He didn't flirt with me,
Right?
but he had that
I'm
reputation.
sure I tried, Jenny. You were just way too mature. Oh. But I was embarrassed a lot every day because I knew I wasn't good at learning, you know? And so I was embarrassed about it, which led to major shame, which we don't have time to get into today, of how that was a major challenge in high school, because now living in shame every day, I've been a fraud for years, right? I mean, think of that. No one knew that. But when you start hiding at a very young age in elementary, by the time you've gotten into high school, you feel like a fraud in your own skin, which I really have a lot of compassion for, you know, for this. But what is it about our society? Because you mentioned this earlier, Ashley, about shame, you know, and some cultures have a higher shame vibe to them. What is it about it here?
Oh man. I think, any area that's going to have a lot of shame is going to be a place where we don't feel like we can show up authentically, right? And feel safe. And so does that happen in classrooms? Absolutely, because you feel like if everybody knows that I can't memorize my times tables, right, then that feels really scary. Or it's going to show up in communities. It will show up in religion. It will show up in sports. It's going to show up anywhere where people can't just 100% be themselves, right? And so that's tricky, because as humans, we shouldn't actually always 100. I mean, we have to know how to have like professionalism and have some, you know, like it's a stretch, right? But like there's this balancing act of like, how do we show up in different spaces, and what is the right way to show up? And we're all figuring it out, right? And we're all trying to figure it out. But the safer the space is to show up for individuals and for our kids, especially, where they know they can fail, where they know they don't need to be perfect, where they have the opportunity to truly learn from their mistakes, instead of being like punished for their mistakes, or where there's growth, or where there's even like a celebration of trying something and being bad at it. It's just, it's hard, because even as a parent, I've had to relearn and relearn and relearn how to not just want to have successful, happy, high achieving kids.
Yeah.
Because that feels really good as a parent, right? But it doesn't foster a healthy kid. And so it's a constant battle of ourselves as parents and as educators and as individuals and communities, of saying like, how do we allow people room to show up here?
Yeah.
You've now both talked about, you know, Jenny mentioned it in the classroom setting. You've now mentioned it in a family setting, the ability to have an environment where failure is okay. You know, and I know a lot of my friends, my peers, who are very successful people, and they have a high standard of their own life expectation, which translates into them having really high expectations of their children. And it's a performance environment, right? Where pressure cooker is an interesting way to say it. They probably wouldn't say, you know, I don't put a lot of pressure on them, but it's insinuated, right? We're capable. We have the opportunity. We might as well just do our best and perform it, you know, at a high level. But there's something there with regards to the safety, the environment of safety, where we all know that failure, you know, is important, and that you have to make mistakes to learn. I mean, the very concept of performance in athletics is that you go to practice and you fail and fail and fail until you win.
Yeah.
And yet it's
really scary in
it's
real life.
really scary. And especially, in these settings that we're talking about where teachers have to have high test scores and all of the things. So what is it about that? Just the environment of being okay with being human, failure, and sitting in that space where it's okay to not perform at the highest level all the time.
I mean, I work a lot of our company, the population we work with is based out of the Bay Area as well. So I have a lot of really successful, driven, high achieving kids that I'm working with, that we're working with, on top of the high achieving kids we're working with in this area. And I think the thing I hear most often is, man, these are all really great parents. Like, they have great intentions with their kids. They are offering them worlds of opportunity. But like you said, inherent to that lifestyle of success is, there's a cliche that says, like, the worst thing about success is you have to stay successful, right? Like, it is, the kids are born into the environment where that's just the norm. That's just the baseline. So when you have worlds of opportunities, when the lifestyle that you lead, affords you the mountains of opportunities, you feel like if you lose those opportunities, everything's going to crash and burn, right? My life growing up was very different. It doesn't match.
Yeah, the opposite.
Yeah, a portion of the success that I've felt now. And my parents did the best they could with what they had, man. They really did the best they could with what they had. But, I didn't have the same opportunities. And so I've been able to take risks in my life because I've been bankrupt. I've been broke. I've had to make new friends and start from scratch. I've had all of those experiences. So I felt safe in myself having failure and mistakes. And I went through my own phase of overcompensation as well, like where, like, screw you guys, I'm gonna just do everything right, trust me. And I did. But when the rubber met the road, all of these life's experiences really created a safety net within my own body. What's happening now that I see, Bible of Jenny, is we're scaffolding too much. We're providing too many opportunities for our kids. So they don't, when they suck at soccer, we sign them up for baseball. When that doesn't work out well, we throw them down the street to cheerleading or whatever it is, right? We're just like, oh, okay, honey, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. And that's great. Opportunities are great. But often I find that our children aren't having to sit in the failure of that for very long. So while they make mistakes and they fail, they're not actually feeling it. And there's this detachment or lack of ownership of the failure, right? A key part of healing from shame is accountability, which is kind of antithetical. But if we're not willing to take accountability for changing direction, for asserting ourselves, for sharing our story, if we don't own that part of ourselves, how are we ever going to heal from the things that are hidden within us? And so when we give our kids mountains of opportunities that they don't have to sit in distress very long, they don't actually have to feel what it feels like to fail, they don't even have an understanding of tolerance for that feeling. So they get a little pocket of embarrassment or shame, right? They maybe say the wrong line in their play and people laugh and they quit plays altogether because their tolerance is so low that they can't even experience it without demonizing it, without thinking that it's going to take them down. And so I look at the emotional kind of lability of things, like how much we can shape shift and move through emotions as being the definition of safety. And I think a lot of the kids we work with specifically haven't had enough experience to put them in that place.
It's fascinating because when you're describing it, you're talking about safety. And at the same time, I'm hearing waves upon waves of people talking about there's a whole generation who's coming into adulthood and the workforce who don't have grit. Mm-hmm. It's hard to work 8 hours in a day.
Yeah, my daughter just said that to me. So that's true.
Valid.
She's 22.
I can't disagree with an 8-hour workday, but do you know what I mean? I mean, there's this component of mental health, and then there's this other part, which is, grit. And how do you find the balance of giving and, having the right environment where safety exists, and yet, building that kind of grit muscle?
Ooh, but
And
that's
are
not
they-
dichotomous. They're the same.
Yes. So say more.
Yeah, I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
but,
it's true.
But I feel, grit, right? To me, mental health is the understanding within ourselves that we can tolerate come what may, right? Come what may, we can tolerate this.
Yep.
And we don't actually know. Confidence is built through experience. So we don't actually know we can tolerate something until we experience it. We have to feel it. We have to experience it. And that's what grit is, right? Is the willingness, the openness to experience it, to shine a light on it, to share it. That's grit. That's what grit in my eyes is. And so mental wellness is about, I think we talk often about being in our 40s and how we love it so much because we just don't care anymore. And our willingness to be able to share that with people has given us the mental dexterity to be able to hey, we're good. I didn't get invited to this thing that all the other moms got invited to, which happens to me a lot. That's okay. That's, I'm comfortable within myself, and I'm safe within myself. So as much as we are responsible as adults and parents and teachers and caregivers to provide safe environments, safety is ultimately found within ourselves and our ability to be able to actionably experience emotions, to have those experiences,
Yeah.
And I think we've scaffolded too much, quite frankly.
It's interesting that you talked about failure and having enough failure in your life or the environment to have failure. I was picturing, your description of soccer or dance or, I failed at that thing or that thing. But it's more than just that. It's failure in interpersonal risk. It is failure. I'm not good at
point.
friends. I'm not, you know what I mean? And so it's more holistic in terms of the environment to fail into in so many other aspects of life, not just your recreation or whatever that label is, right? We want to help our kids quickly get to, are you a dancer, a soccer player? Are you a mountain biker? What are you? What label are you getting to? Because I think all of us as parents want to see our kids succeed. So we do jump with them.
Yeah.
We ourselves are not comfortable in their failure.
Yeah, you
so
nailed
much.
it.
So say more about this.
I think
The
that's been
correlation between
yeah.
parent failure and being able to sit in their discomfort
Yeah.
Yeah.
is uncomfortable for us as parents. But how important is that?
Oh, I think it's the important thing. I mean, I think as my own journey as a parent, that's been the most impactful lesson I have to say keep learning, because it's not a one-time thing. But when I cannot rescue my kids, they're so much better off.
Yeah.
When I can just let them mess up and not even attach a lesson to that, just have it just be a thing. They do so much better and I do so much better and we all feel better. So there's this interesting for sure pressure that we all feel to kind of save our kids from anything uncomfortable, and I think we do it without realizing we're doing it. And yeah, it's not helping.
I had an interesting experience on speak about embarrassing. About a week ago, I took my daughter to dinner. My partner and I took my daughter and her partner to dinner. They had watched our dog for the weekend. We went to a Padres game. And we're sitting at dinner, and I'm currently in the process. I've failed a lot at relationships. You probably need a whole nother host of podcasts for me, and I'm willing to share, but it's a mess. But anyway, I'm in a new relationship. Well, 2 years, so that's good. And it's a good one. It's a safe one. And we're working on blending, and there's a lot of complications with this blending. And I was sitting at dinner with my partner, my daughter, and her partner's a lot more gentle than she is. And it's kind of well, we're talking about this topic. And she's well, you could try this and try this. And I just see my daughter stirring her ketchup. And I'm oh no, we're I'm ready. She's going to blow. She's literally going to blow. I raised her, obviously. So she's going to say what she thinks. And she stopped stirring her ketchup and she's like, and I was talking about how he's going to create these paradoxes for these kids. And I'm like, okay, well, if I do this and do this, then they're going to see this and then it's going to be okay. And I had the whole thing mapped out. I'm not calculated at all. And, this plan went on for about 15 minutes, honestly. It was a huge topic of conversation. So my daughter finally stepped in and she was like, or Mom, you could do nothing. And I was like, what do you mean by that? She's like, I mean, I've never known anybody who like really gets the job done when they're forced into a paradox. Like, I don't know anybody who learns a lesson being forced into anything. So you could just let them make their own choices. Like, you could just literally do nothing. I was like, okay. Well, hadn't thought of that. And thank you for the input. And it hasn't left my mind all week. It has not left my mind. I'm in the business of helping people expose themselves to things. That's literally what I do for a living. And I still have this inherent desire to make things work. And my heart was in the right place. And I want what's best for this family and these kids. And I feel it so deeply. And also, I need to let go in order to let the experience happen. And I was just talking about it actually driving here when I was talking to text on Siri on my car on the way here to a friend. Like, I just can't get it out of my mind, this feedback from my daughter, to just let it go. And I think this is the rub for a lot of people. And I have clients and parents who will come in all the time. I've had a couple of experiences with this really recently where parents will come in and really want feedback and answers on their child. And the answer that we have for them is like, you need to do this work. I think your kid's going to be okay. They're kind of messing things up right now. Like, there's some stuff happening and we'll get there. But I think the bigger work is yours. And talk about a hard conversation, right? That's a hard conversation to have with families. But like Ashley said, that's the biggest part of this system of failure that we need to allow our kids to experience and feel. Like, if we don't allow ourselves to feel failure, if I come in and overcompensate, which I did just a hell of a lot of as a parent. I was a single mom. I parented 2 children, one with special needs, and I was fine all the time, like just fine. And then I got cancer. I actually wasn't fine, turns out. And I had a best friend of mine step in and take care of some things and get some support for me through the government and things like that at that time that I was dead set on not receiving as a result. My point is we have to just let go, And when I was defensive when my daughter said this to me. The clients that I have in my office are often quite defensive. And I teach the therapists that work for me that defensiveness means you're on you nailed it. If people get defensive around you in therapy and session, then that means you're just on the right track to stay there. And so I knew when my daughter said this to me, I needed to stay there.
Fascinating. Because we need to double click on this a little bit more, because at the root cause, you're talking about letting go. Mm-hmm. And yet I know your specialty in OCD and anxiousness. Yeah. And in my head, I'm thinking, let go. What's the correlation here? And how much is control a part of OCD, anxiety, right? And I'm baiting you a little bit because my wife's a therapist and I know the OCD in our lives. Yeah. And it all correlates. Mm-hmm. So what is it about letting go that people struggle with? And how is control tied to OCD?
Go ahead. Well, letting go is just really scary. Mm-hmm. Kind of on a side note to that, as like a parent, letting go feels really scary. Not that long ago, I was sitting in my own therapy session and my therapist said to me, trust feels like love. And I'm like, whoa. And I just keep thinking about it. But when we're talking to our kids and when we are like trusting our kids to make decisions and to figure things out and to fail, if we really trust them to do that and take that process from beginning to end of like, I'm going to let you figure it out.
Yeah.
That feels like love to them. And I just keep kind of coming back to that of like, when we allow space for our kids to feel our trust, then they can feel our love, which I think is huge. So that was kind of a little side note to that. But I think it's scary from a parent perspective because control's way easier. It's way easier to like help our kids and to micromanage, and it's just a lot harder to do exactly what Abby was saying, where to just be like, I'm just gonna step back and trust that the people in my life have what I don't know, just like trust them to do it. So
Or trust them not to,
absolutely
right? And to be okay either way,
yeah,
you know?
I like that.
How do you find the balance of that? Like, there's part of me who hears you and says, how do I trust my kid? You know, I mean, our listeners can't see this, but see those tractors behind you?
Yeah.
Yesterday, one of them starts up. I'm thinking, are our
Working on
our
Sunday.
landscapers here on Sunday afternoon? Cool, good for them. Like, they're getting after it. No, it was my teenager who went out there, started up a giant tractor, and is like, hey, I think I'm going to mix it up, you know? So there's trusting your kid. Like, should I have just watched him and been like, I trust you? Like, I hope you don't drive that into that large hole.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then there's irresponsibility. So
Sure.
I think that parents, though, in our own, you know, we call it being responsible. And then we just say, I'm going to take it a step further. And then we want control. And underneath it all is what? It's fear.
Fair.
I mean, for me, it was. And literally, I'm like, he's going to tumble the tractor off the hill.
Sure.
Right.
You know, but say more about that. Is parents get involved? What's the underlying fear?
I think the fear is that they're gonna lose their kids, right? Like, I think one of our core fears as human beings is this idea of abandonment. But like, if we don't step in and protect our kids, or if we just allow them to make these mistakes, that they're gonna leave us, you know? And I think maybe that's more of the mother perspective, but I hear that in my office probably more often than anything. At the core for parents is they're afraid that the kids are gonna do something different than what they want them to do, which means that they're gonna leave in their bones. It feels that way in their body. And I think fear, you know, sometimes is based in perception. Sometimes is based in, you know, wanting to feel like we have it all together. But deeper than that, really, we just want our people that we love to love us back and live a life with them. And at the core of most, I don't know, parent stuff that I see is they're afraid the kids are going to leave.
Literal departure, like, what do you mean leave?
Emotionally leave. Choose a different path, you know?
Differentiation or
Yeah, like do something that maybe they wouldn't have chosen for themselves, or be unsuccessful, or maybe not get married at the age that they think that they should be married at, or, you know, go to school in something different, or choose a different religion, or choose something that's going to put them in an othered space. That means that they're gone. They're gone from how we feel. I hear that deep fear from parents more often.
You're talking about something that strikes a nerve, though, and I just want to double click on this more, because you're describing a way that a parent would say that their ideal vision of what their child's life should be like versus
Totally.
the child's vision of what it should be like. Totally. I mean, one of my children has an entirely different trajectory in a way in terms of his faith, you know, that's different than mine, and how does that project on me?
Right.
The fear of that, our extended family, all of those things. Yeah. Say more about that in particular, you know, of us as parents feeling responsible to raise the children in a mature way. And yet at some point, in order for them to have the grit and to launch and to leave home and to thrive on their own, they can't just fulfill our vision of their own lives. They have to have their own. So how do you coach people through the responsibility of parenthood into the ability to launch a child into adulthood successfully? Because there's so much there, so much fear.
I wonder at times if it's even our responsibility to launch our children into adulthood successfully. I think it's their responsibility to go into adulthood and to take it and to be with it. But I'm not sure it's our responsibility to give them that. And I think how we define responsibility in caregiving and parenthood is really interesting, you know? And a lot of it is based in what we think is going to bring our children, again, all the best intentions of the world, all these paradoxes I was going to create, great intentions, right? I wanted to give that to them so that they would be able to heal and see things in a way that I thought was going to be so eye-opening for them. Rule number one of being a therapist is we can't assert our plans for people onto them, right? And that works with people because it's a blank slate for them to be able to look at us and say, oh man, like I'm really saying that thing. I want to do that thing. I actually don't want to do that thing. That's interesting. And we're this mirror reflecting back to them all the time, right? What they actually want and don't want. But as parents, sometimes we forget that we're a mirror and we instead we have this map, this road map laid out for our kids, even if it's not externalized, right? Most of us don't do it externally, but internally, like, oh, well, they're going to do this and this and this. My daughter just graduated from college last May, and my whole Instagram post was about me because I was like, I dreamed of this day. I dreamed of this day more than her wedding and like all of this stuff, right? Because it was on my map. So I was like, great, she did it. That's great. I checked that one off my list, but it wasn't about me. And so when we talk about exposure therapy, I want to loop that in here a little bit. When we don't give our kids the opportunities to have experiences outside of our roadmap, right? They will go off the roadmap at some point, and likely they're going to steer way off that roadmap because they don't have any experience with gray. So when we give our kids a life plan, I'm going to put this really simply. Like when we go on a diet, I go on diets all the time. I know that that's not okay to say, but I do. And I will like limit calorie intake. I suddenly become fascinated with the contents of my pantry. Like, okay, well, I'm going to inventory it. I'm going to take it. Like, I can't stop thinking about, you know, the cookies I want to buy or this thing that it's just in my mind, right? It exists in my mind. And when we create a path that feels very myopic or very singular or very just, you know, scaffolded, sheltered for our kids, they don't even have the ability to step outside the pantry. They don't know what's there. And so when they dabble and they go to college for the first time and they have this wide open pantry available to them, we're going to see people that really either get terrified of entering that pantry, which happens to a lot of our kids, or they're just like, screw it, man, I'm all in. And we don't want either of those options for our kids. So the more we expose them to lots of emotional experiences, not necessarily opportunities, but lots of emotional experiences, the more that they're going to have their values and their morals kind of like hooked in to their being when we do send them into adulthood. And for me, what I think the job of parenthood is, even though I fail at it all the freaking time, is to be able to just let our kids be who they are as adults, to just honestly love them. Have them come home for holidays, let whomever they bring sit at your table and just love them. Because it's there. There's a Dixie Chicks song. I think they changed their name. The Chicks now.
Chicks, yeah.
I'm sorry. I keep doing a lot of these mistakes. Anyway.
Oh, I love it.
And I will quote this to parents often because it stuck with me. And I think I only listened to the album once, but it's one of their newer albums. And it's a whole album of diss tracks, if anyone's interested, which I love. But in one of the songs, she's talking about her child experiencing this hard thing. And she writes the line and sings the line, like, you are of me, but you aren't mine. And that, like, it still gives me goosebumps when I think of that. Our children are of us, but they aren't ours. They never were. So when we try to optimize our kids to stay on this path, right? Be it through education, be it through sports, athletics, academics, religion, friends. We have parents all the time who are so worried about like who their kids are friends with at school. When we optimize our kids' lives, we're creating a system of burnout for our kids and a lack of tolerance for any kind of emotional fragility at all. So we need to give them those experiences, and we need to let go,
I think there was a study recently that I was so fascinated with, and I don't remember the details, but it was basically like parents have oh crap, I can't even think of what it's called now.
Compensated?
Not overcompensating, but it's basically like we think we have more influence than we really
Oh.
do. And
Over-aggrandized.
yes, there
Yes.
you go.
I read the same thing.
And it was so good, and it was also like, ouch, like, are you kidding me? Like,
The
of course.
percentage was incredibly low.
Yeah.
That
Yes.
of what we as parents believe we actually can
Totally.
influence.
Right. And maybe
versus
you remember it better. But I think it was something like the only thing that like we have any guarantee over is like, are we a safe place?
Food, shelter, water.
And I was like,
Yep.
oh my gosh. But it also lets parents off the hook. Like, let's stop trying to be everything for our kids. And let's go back to that like community piece where the teachers like matter and get to have a say. And when I think about like healing, like we heal in relationships, right? So like allowing those things for our kids and not having it not be just us, but like the community, the people, the experiences, the everything. I don't know. I think that to me has been like a little flip in my head that I have to keep, obviously, switch, flip, whatever, over and over again of like, this isn't my job here. My job is to just like love my kid. And
That's it.
that's it.
Yeah.
When you have clients who come to you for professional help, they may say something like, my child is highly anxious. We're dealing with anxiety. And then you dive into the questions and the assessment and, the testing that is going on. How often is anxiety the root cause versus the symptom of something greater?
I mean, we all have anxiety. So let's just get that out of the way. Like, we're born with it, right? We all have this amygdala in our brain that fires out these signals that we have it. We feel it. It's normal. It's a part of our life. What I see more often is parents will assume their kids have anxiety. And what has really happened is they've demonized discomfort in their home as being something that is bad. So kids begin to feel anxiety and then they're like, oh, I'm not supposed to feel uncomfortable. That feels uncomfortable. And so then they avoid. And this pattern of avoidance occurs over and over and over again to try to avoid the anxiety that's just quite naturally there. Like, we're supposed to feel anxious. We were anxious last night. I'm anxious all the time. Anxiety is a part of living. But when we make the implication of anxiety be something that we need to avoid, just inherent to like it being bad, like, oh, if that made you uncomfortable, I need you to stay away. Then it's scary for kids and anxiety grows. What we know to be true about the neurology of anxiety is that it's negatively reinforced, which means that the more we try to avoid it, the bigger it grows. So I am never, ever, like, I run a practice based off of anxiety and I'm like, okay, yeah, you have anxiety. What else is it? And often it's just, hey, we need some structure. We need some boundaries. We need to feel safe in ourselves and in the home and in let go of some of this optimization that we see. I think that's a huge part of our practice. And then sometimes it's something bigger than that or different than that. Sometimes it's OCD. We know that with anxiety disorders specifically, that it becomes a problem when it impacts our daily functioning. And that's true of any diagnosis, right? If I can't go to work, if I can't go to school, then we know we're dealing with something in the more disordered range of anxiety. But more often than not, quite frankly, the people that come into my practice that say they have anxiety really just need help learning how to get comfortable with feeling anxious. And they don't necessarily have an anxiety disorder. OCD is a little different. It's not necessarily an anxiety disorder. It's in its own little pocket. But anxiety itself, I think, is more of a symptom than anything else.
I totally agree. I also think you mentioned something that I see a lot is just that comfort of all the different feelings. In the mental health space, I think lots of people have said it, but Dr. Pressman talks about it a lot, saying like all emotions are okay, all behaviors are not. And so even when I work with like really young kids, we kind of start there sometimes and talk about all the emotions and then all the emotions being okay. And even when you ask like a little 8-year-old, so is it okay to be angry? They're like, no.
Right.
And I'm like, yes, you can totally be angry. It's just what you're going to do with that anger. Like, what's the behavior there? Like, how can you be angry? How can that feeling be okay? How can the behavior that's attached to it be appropriate? And they're like, really? And even to talk to parents about it, sometimes parents will be like, well, you were angry. Or you weren't really angry. It was just like, it's, we are not, as people, we're not comfortable with a lot of emotions. And we're not comfortable with letting our kids feel a lot of emotions. And so letting it be that really, truly all emotions are okay, all behavior is not, like that's a skill that we're learning.
And the responsibility piece for parents, right, is to help teach them the behaviors that aren't welcome, right? That's where boundaries come in. So we set boundaries in our home. There's no violence. I always tell parents they can have 3 rules with their teenagers, but if you go above that, they're just going to blow you off. So set some boundaries.
Yeah.
That's our job. We should do that.
Absolutely. And there should be boundaries.
Absolutely.
And rules.
Because that creates safety. That creates a safe experience for us to have all feelings if we know we're not going to get punished for them. Right.
What's the fine balance? But when you talk about an environment of safety, I'm picturing our own household interactions with children. What's allowed, what's not allowed. Definitely, when our children were younger, to the extent the emotions were shared, how they were shared, there was some safety in it. But there was a lot of emotions that it was like, well, anger is not necessarily allowed because we would be irresponsible parents if we just allowed anger to flourish.
Right. Yep.
Our faith background teaches us that a lot of those things are we just don't do that, right? Which is a whole other shame discussion for another time. Yeah. But how do you find a balance of that? An environment that is safe for emotion sharing, obviously not behaviorally. Some behaviors are not okay, but what's the right balance for parents?
I think it's tough and it's individual to our kids, right? I think that's what we as parenting culture get wrong a lot is we make these blanket rules, but really it's individualized to kids. So I know that something I see often or something I talk to parents about often is, like, what are your deal breakers? For me in my house, I didn't care about swearing at all. Didn't care about it. It wasn't anything I saw as a sign of respect. I just didn't bother me. I don't know. It didn't. Call it my years in youth corrections. I have a lot of tolerance for it. People who know me know this. But lying was a big deal for me. That was a major, it felt like betrayal in my bones. Even when it was my kids' silly lies, it just felt really big for me. So in my home, in order to model like emotional regulation, I knew that lying was always going to be something that we spoke about. That was a boundary for me. And so I can think of one hand how many times my daughter got in trouble as a teenager, trouble being like a consequence applied to her behavior. And all 3 of them weren't a result of like her, stepping out and doing something like with friends that she wasn't supposed to do or whatever. It was about her lying to me about it. That was one of our non-negotiables. And so creating your own, like values should be driven by like what actually our system tells us, not what anybody else. It should be an internalized approach. And in our homes, we get to create that. So looking within yourself, understanding your non-negotiables and creating a path that's going to allow you to be regulated. I knew if my daughter lied to me, I would come unhinged. And I did a couple of times. Both of those times I probably are my biggest parenting fails. And I knew they were going to be. That's why I made them a non-negotiable. So like I had already kind of pocketed for that. But still, we get to, I don't think I could, maybe you can. You're wiser than me on parenting maybe. But I don't think I could ever give a general rule of thumb other than come up with your own value system and stick to it. Talk about it. Talk about why that's a thing for you and follow through on the consequences if they're applied, Yeah.
Actually, do you have non-negotiables?
I have non-negotiables, but they're pretty funny. My kids will be like, they know that the non-negotiables look a little bit different. Like
for each kid?
Well, no, more just like,
for mom and dad.
What would get my kids in trouble would be like if they were really mean to somebody.
Yeah.
But if they're like 25, 30 minutes late, I'm like, I don't care. So they're like, they call us hippie parents. So like we have hippie parents. But in education, when we wanted like buy-in from the class, we would make class rules together. So like with my little second graders or fourth graders, we'd sit down and everybody would come up with what the like 3 to 5 class rules were going to be. And we'd all talk about them, and then we'd all sign the poster, and everybody was on board. I do the same thing and recommend the same thing with families of like set up yourself, do your own family rules, have everybody give suggestions and get the kids involved for the buy-in. Our own little family, we decided to write a constitution for our family, like with the actual like
Wording.
And we update the Constitution.
Tell me the day you all signed it into existence. The Blazers were involved.
It was so funny.
They were involved for sure.
But yeah, it's like, John's got the computer out and it's then up on the TV. So he's typing the Constitution and everybody's chipping in. And it's so funny because we're like, well, we have to keep updating it. Clearly it's a living document. But
FYI.
FYI. But the one rule that's like stuck for everybody, which is so funny, is like there will be no yelling from room to room, because that is like highly triggering for everybody. Yeah. So if you would like to speak to somebody, you have to like go into the other room and be like, hey, you can't yell Mom, or I can't yell down to my kids.
Sure.
And that was like one of their rules, and it's the number one that's like stuck. So if I get lazy, and I do all the time, and I'll yell downstairs, and it's like, Mom, that's in the Constitution. Like you cannot yell from room to room. Yeah. I'm like, great, I'll call them then. But like we have had to adjust, but everybody's on board. And so is it perfect? No, but like it's effective because it reflects our family values. It reflects what works for us. Yeah. They've got to participate. It's fun for them. They helped with like what happens if you aren't home, or what happens if you are breaking the rule over and over again, or if you're disrespectful. I mean, what does that look like? They created it. We did it together. So that's my only
I love that
thing.
Talk about the balance in between extremes. The parents that are just literally not present, and the parents who are running the family like they are the CEO of a publicly traded company, and it's very intense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do a lot of work with KSL and my friend Boyd Matheson, so I'm going to quote him here. He talks often about false dichotomies, and how often when we feel afraid or we feel insecure in an area, we create these two options, where on one hand we feel like we have to be hippie parents like Ash, and on the other hand, we have to be like business driven CEOs. And there's a lot of safety in having certainty attached to both of those, right? And the experience of failing and rewriting a constitution and screwing up when my daughter lied to me, those experiences are really heavy to tolerate, right? I can remember where I was both of those times. I can't remember many conversations with my daughter, but I can remember those two. So those pockets really stay with us. And so I don't think we have to necessarily find a balance between the two. What I'd like to do is kind of eradicate the idea that there is anything to subscribe to there. Like we get to just decide in our home what feels good for our relationship, what feels good for our relationship with our kids. And it's a real internalized, driven sense of morality that is much, much harder, because when I do come unhinged when my daughter lies, I feel it a lot more deeper, right? Yeah. It's not like, oh, she just broke a rule. That's not about me. It's like, oh man, this hit my heart. This was a value for me. So it's a lot harder. But I think that we balance boundaries and failure, letting go, this concept we've been talking about, by honestly, and I feel like a broken record here, but by just admitting it all the time, by being accountable, by talking about it. Both of those times that I came unhinged at my daughter, I'm sure she could detail them for you, but she's not here, so thank you. I went back after and talked about it, Like, I don't like the way that felt for me. And although we did cross a boundary here, I also feel like I'd like to repair. And this idea of modeling repair to me offers the gray between both of those dichotomies, where we have boundaries, we allow space for letting go, and we screw it up literally all the time. And then we just talk about it and we repair it, and we talk about it and we repair it. One of my broken relationships, I told you they'd come up again, but the feedback I was given often was, you just want to talk about everything. You just want to talk about everything. And I'm like, well, there's a lot to repair here.
Yeah.
So I'm just doing my best to try to repair.
Well, mom's a pro talker.
But that's honestly it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, then we don't carry it inside us. It doesn't turn to resentment. It doesn't turn to regret. It doesn't turn to shame. It doesn't turn to contempt. All of these really gnarly emotions that feel awful living inside of. When we just talk about it all the time, then we're good. We do this in staff meeting almost every week. There's another therapist, I have to bring her up, Lauren, who works for us, who lives in Hawaii, and she's licensed here, and she's a new mom and going through all these things we're talking about today. And we come to our staff meeting and do more of our own processing and repair work with each other, with our clients, theoretically, with our families, because it just allows us to release it and be better therapists when we go back into our sessions with our clients. And I think if we use that same type of modeling, that's the gray that we speak of, right? In parenting, how can I just sit with my kids, talk about all the BS that I need to talk about, and then go hang out and go grab ice cream and go for a walk and feel free, it's out of my bones, and I can just be in this lovely relationship with my child rather than focusing on optimization,
Yeah. What if family culture is not a talk about it culture? That environment doesn't necessarily exist. It's uncomfortable. I mean, they're not talkers per se. There's even watching you just do that activity of getting it out.
Yeah.
There's a rigidity in a lot of family culture.
Oh, for sure.
Perfectionism, rigidity. If you couple that with, no one is necessarily astute at being great at talking about it. Yeah. What do you do? I mean, I would imagine that
you have more experience with that than me.
that walks into your office a lot,
Yeah.
probably,
Oh, a
right?
lot.
Just coach us up.
Sure.
We're not good at this.
Well, I mean, I think it's just part of human nature too, to not want to have uncomfortable conversations. But the more we, speaking of exposure, have uncomfortable conversations, the easier it gets, right? When I was growing up, I was really lucky to have a dad who had this incredible awareness, I think, even for his age and for his time in life. But he was so good at apologizing. And it was really incredible. When I think about it now,
Your dad apologized to you.
Would apologize and still does all the time. He is so good at apologizing. I think he had a friend who had said to him, "My dad apologized to me," and that was so foreign to him. My dad didn't have a good relationship with his dad, and his dad, my grandpa, never really showed up anywhere. Was not a really supportive guy. Anyway, so my dad kind of took it to heart and was like, that was so moving to him to hear that his friend's dad had apologized to him. He couldn't even wrap his brain around it. So as a dad, and I have 4 sisters, so it's my dad and mom and then 5 daughters. And we were emotional. We are emotional. That was part of it. And my dad was so good at apologizing. If he ever got frustrated or mad or didn't understand why all 5 of us were crying, or he just walked out because it was too much, and then he'd come back. And he's just modeled that repair over and over and over and over again, and still does. I mean, I'll get texts from all the time where it's just hey, I'm sorry about how I handled that. And I'm thinking, you're a gem. It was great. But the idea that we just don't have to be perfect as parents, and that we can and should model to our kids how to apologize. Yeah. I saw that, and I try and do it, and I try to tell my kids, look, when I mess up, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to tell you I was wrong. I'm going to try to do it better. And then I hope one day you grow up, and when you mess up, you don't have to beat yourself up so much, because you remember that you didn't have a perfect parent who didn't have a perfect parent, but what you did have was somebody who was willing to say, like, I screwed it up and I'm sorry and I'll try again.
Accountability.
Yeah, and just keep trying.
A
But the
couple
shame
minutes
isn't
ago,
there.
actually, you said something to the effect of, and the pressure is off as a result. You know, I think that we talk about it in the context of, well, if our kids know that we're not perfect, then it's an environment for them to not feel like they have to be perfect. But it
Yeah.
also allows us to feel less anxiousness as a parent to not be perfect.
Yeah.
In modeling that, you know, in our own lives, our willingness to apologize to our children. I remember a time when our oldest was a young teen where we sat him down and he was like, oh, here comes the talk again. And what he got was an apology from us, a genuine one of, dude, we suck at this.
Yeah.
You know, and we're sorry. We handled it wrong. I blew up. You know, I've lost it, Jenny, a couple times, you know, that I remember like, that was horrible.
Yeah.
You know,
Like,
I
not
couldn't
my
have
best
modeled
moment.
something
Yeah.
worse. But an apology was incredibly powerful for the relationship, and it created a different environment.
Yeah.
So talk more a little bit, and maybe as we kind of wrap this up, what you're seeing clinically specific to family environments and what you may or may not connect OCD or anxiety or some of the other conditions that are coming in through the door that you're trying to address, and you're seeing the environment that is going on in their lives that is driving some of that. You know, I know that some of it's born. You know, there's some things that are genetic. I fully believe that my kids are getting genes.
Yeah.
Good luck, dudes.
I know.
You know, dad had it, so you are. But what are some of the environmental things, maybe coupled with some of the genetic things that come through the door where you have to address the system in order to get better at addressing the one person, maybe a child, but in reality, it's systemic.
We love systems work. We talk a
Yeah.
ton about systems work. Families are systems, and the best work I think we do is when we approach things from a whole system. We have multiple clients where it's like one of us sees the mom, one of us sees the child, one of us sees
The other child, the grandparents.
the grandparent, you know, and it's beautiful because the work that is happening in those systems is it's incredible because it's the real work. It's everybody that's saying like, I want to make a difference here and I want to do it. So systems work is like near and dear to our hearts, I think, for sure.
Absolutely. I think for me, like when my dad went through rehab, I remember going and visiting him in rehab a couple of times, and there was absolutely zero support for me. I was 7, almost 8 at the time. And a lot of the work I needed to do in my own personal life came as a result of the fact that I didn't really get to do anything with this space like that I was in, and did a lot of like angsty teenagery things that I feel were well warranted on my behalf with my dad. And I come from a home of lots of talking, so it's the opposite. My partner, on the other hand, does not. So, but we were able to talk through it often. But what I felt like was this huge gap in my own personal experience with systems work. And so when I set out on this idea of opening a private practice, it was just me in the beginning, and I was totally cool with that. And then kind of stumbled into hiring Lauren, who I adore, and then, you know, very calculated, got Ashley as a result. And my dream was to be able to work with families and systems, because I can't imagine how my life would be different if I had more, my dad had more of a systems approach to the work that he did. It greatly impacted my life that he got sober, but the system stayed for the rest of my, you know, experience growing up with them. They're getting a little better now. I just spent 40 minutes on the phone with my dad last week. It was such a lovely call, but you know, the only way we heal is through relationships, to Ashley's point earlier. And if we aren't addressing the system and the system of perfection, the system of expectation, the system of, I keep using this word, but I think it's really important, optimization. How are we, like, why are we trying to optimize this experience? Why are we trying to optimize our children? If we don't address the system of what that looks like and the individual players, then we all know what happens to a company when we do that. It fails over time. You know, it might be real successful on paper in the beginning, and then it just bursts.
Yeah.
And we see that exact same response in the system of family work. You know, I was a very successful person on paper. I did all the right things. I made all the right moves, did all these things really young in my career. And my interpersonal relationships with my kids were great. The rest of them, man, that the system of trust that I didn't have, that wasn't addressed, really impacted my adult life in ways that I'm still working on in therapy, quite frankly. So we're lucky enough to have a team that is willing to go inside the gray and do systems work, because it requires being able to communicate with therapists, but also family members, and have a lot of hard conversations. But when we see OCD, you're right about the genetics. When we see anxiety, you're right about the genetics. I see anxiety really being as function of the system 9 times out of 10. Then I see it being an actual disordered genetic way of living. And once we address the system, we see a lot of tolerance of anxiety, and things change deeply. I've seen that over and over and over and over again, from boarding school work to outpatient work. OCD is a little bit different, but it is so highly genetic. It's one of the most highly genetic conditions that we have, next to like bipolar schizophrenia. So we see a lot of systems where parents have OCD, and then their kids are functions of their OCD. And we're often playing chicken or egg in terms of, is it the parent's OCD that's creating the system and the OCD response in the child, or is it true OCD in the child? And we do a lot of good work addressing that there. But in order to do OCD systems work, gosh, I think this is true of any work, as I say it, as I'm thinking about saying it, we have to really dismantle the system. Mm-hmm. We have to really just shake up the way that we're doing things. And it goes back to letting go and taking accountability inside that system. You know, exposure therapy is a huge component of it, but exposure therapy, as precise the actual modality is a very generalized approach to living. So exposure therapy is really, in essence, the idea that the more that we enter into the discomfort that we're feeling, the larger our scope for tolerance of that discomfort grows. And we will be able to expose ourselves to worlds of emotions as a result of us just taking steps into this uncomfortable, you know, feeling, whatever it was. Some families it's shame, sometimes it's guilt, sometimes it's, you know, failure or anger or whatever. But whatever feeling that we don't have comfort with, we try it out. We create pathways. I can't tell you how many times a week I'm giving people the assignment of saying this hard thing to their friend, or sending a text message in session to the friend, like, hey, you hurt my feelings the other day. Or talking to their mom about something that she had said 5 years ago that may have hurt their feelings, that may be less important now, but for that kid who's saying that thing, it's a way of dismantling the system of, we don't say that thing. So exposure work, although we use it for OCD in a really precise way, that's probably for a different type of podcast, I've found it to be a way of living. Mm-hmm. It's how we treat depression often, is by, we create hope in our world by trying to do things that are different, by doing different things. And we treat, I can't think of anything I don't treat using the tenets of exposure therapy. So I don't know, for me, systems work is where it begins and ends, honestly.
Yeah. Hearing you describe it that way, I've never really put it in that context before, but if the person who is dealing with the underlying issue is not allowed to work on that exposure in the system, it's not going to stick.
Yeah.
It's not going to stay. I actually mentioned something when we first started about the system in the school district. Mm-hmm. You know, the work that you are doing, it was amazing to me to hear that you're going in and you're involved in the school with the teacher, with the principal, with the counselor, and connecting the dots in that system. I would imagine that's why it's there, right?
Yes.
Is to give additional resources and context to the individual, whether a child that's going to the school there, and then the parents' support there. Is that what's going on really, is addressing the holistic system of where this individual is attending?
Totally. 100%. Yeah. And I think to even kind of circle back to like, the intersection of mental health and education, the more we use that system in a favorable way, where we're not pitting teachers and parents against each other, where we're not pitting therapists against parents. I mean, all of it, right? So if we say like, this is our kids' system, let's use it and work, like do the best we can with the system in place and help and use all of the system, right? I mean, I just heard probably 2 or 3 different people just in the last 2 days say, I went and mentioned to a teacher kind of what I'm going through with my mental health, and they were so great. Like the response was so warm and encouraging, and like, let me help in any way I can. And I've thought, of course, like teachers want to help, they want to know, right? But there's so much, like they're not always looped into that, right? And we do that if we can, where we email teachers or we meet with them or we go in and we just try to make the whole holistic system work better.
Yeah, we dismantle it and shape shift it into what works for the individual, right? Rather than assuming or making, like with parenting, right? I'm not going to make a blanket statement like this is what works for all parents. I'm not going to say the same thing about education either, or somebody's educational experience. And so we believe deeply in assessing that on an individual level. And I wish everybody could have that experience in the school system. I love public education deeply. I have a couple hills I'll die on. That's one of them.
Mine too.
But they have a lack of resources. They have a lack of funding. Ashley's still always surprised that I will pay her for her time outside of like the actual session, because she's like, what? That didn't exist. I worked hours and hours for free. So we're working with people who are truly doing this job because they love the job, right? And so coming in as outsiders to that experience and helping shapeshift that system requires delicacy, like your experience with your son, and also just a lot of respect and honoring of the place of the teacher in that system as well. So yeah, to dismantle it, we have to kind of like respect it. We
100%.
have to say, hey, like, I understand that there's a value in this. And also like, I wonder if we could try something out, expose ourselves to something a little different here and see how it works. And then be willing to apologize, repair, come back to the table and adjust the Constitution, right, as needed. But systems it's not just the system in our home, it's our community system, our religious system, our educational system. It's, the system of oppression. It's the system, all of these systems play a role in the development of who we are. And therapy, good therapy, should involve dismantling of a lot of that for the individual. But I would love to do it the whole, but that's for another day.
Right. I think if at the end of the day, like we're saying, we care about kids, right? We care about teenagers. We care about our clients. Like, it would make sense to say, like, let's involve everybody that's a part of this kid's system.
For sure.
And see what we can do to make things better.
Yep.
It's incredible work. So complicated, so much there. It's amazing that there are professionals like you who have the tools to connect all the dots. Thank goodness, for...
We try, right? And then we repair.
For who you are and what you're doing. And now you're amazing. Thank you for lifting the mental health of Utahns, those in the Bay Area and everywhere else. Any last thoughts? Any mic drops, Ash?
Oh gosh, I don't have any mic drops. No.
I'll go with my mantra that I kind of sign off with a lot, which
Yeah.
is this idea that like taking action is the only thing that will predicate emotional change. So as an exposure therapist, I believe very, very deeply that we can't just heal ourselves through thinking. We can't heal ourselves through, just trying to create a list and engage in these coping skills, and they help, but it's not going to work entirely. We have to actually take action differently. We have to have new experiences, and we have to be willing to feel new feelings in order to change the way we feel, right? Like quality of life really, really expands when we challenge ourselves to take action. So
That's brilliant to finish on, because I often get asked by friends, acquaintances, those who just, life's hard, rub dirt on it and you'll be fine. You don't need therapy. What you just described, I think, is the actual work of therapy, is action.
yeah.
I think it's often thought that therapy is just, you talk about it, but nothing ever changes. And
Right, yeah.
although I believe talking in and of itself is therapeutic, I have a therapist. I've been in therapy 25 years of marriage, My wife's brilliant at the benefits of just talking in and of itself, but to go into a therapeutic alliance with someone who's clinically expert and to be challenged to do things behaviorally, even if it's just challenging a mindset, but to actually do things action oriented is the coaching that humanity needs. That is getting the guidance and the resources. So thank you both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Incredible
thank you.
work you're doing. We appreciate it. Thanks for being on.
Yeah.
Thank you.